Section 27 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 2, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston du de VERE. Life of Donatello, sculptor of Florence. Donato, who was called Donatello by his relatives, and wrote his name thus on some of his works, was born in Florence in the year 1403. Devoting himself to the arts of design, he was not only a very rare sculptor and a marvelous statuary, but also a practised worker in stucco, an able master of perspective, and greatly esteemed as an architect, and his works showed so great grace, design, and excellence, that they were held to approach more nearly to the marvellous works of the ancient Greeks and Romans than those of any other craftsman whatsoever. Wherefore it is with good reason that he is ranked as the first who made a good use of the invention of scenes in low relief, which he wrought so well that it is recognized from the thought, the facility, and the mastery that he showed therein, that he had a true understanding of them, making them with a beauty far beyond the ordinary. For not only did no craftsman in this period ever surpass him, but no one even in our own age has equalled him. Donatello was brought up from his early childhood in the house of Ruberto Martelli, where, by his good qualities and by his zealous talent, he won the affection not only of Martelli himself, but of all that noble family. As a youth he wrought many things, which were not held in great account, by reason of their number, but what made him known for what he was and gave him a name was an Annunciation in grey stone, which was placed close to the altar of the chapel of the Cavalcanti in the church of San Croce in Florence. For this he made an ornament composed in the grotesque manner, with a base of varied intertwined work and a decoration of quadrantal shape, adding 6 boys bearing certain festoons, who appeared to be holding one another securely with their arms in their fear of the height. But the greatest genius and art that he showed was in the figure of the Virgin, who, alarmed by the unexpected apparition of the angel, is making a most becoming reverence, with a sweet and timid movement of her person, turning with most beautiful grace towards him who is saluting her, in a manner that there are seen in her countenance that humility and gratitude which are due to one who presents an unexpected gift, and the more when the gift is a great one. Besides this, Donato showed a masterly flow of curves and folds in the draperies of that Madonna and of the angel, demonstrating with a suggestion of the nude forms below how he was seeking to recover the beauty of the ancients, which had lain hidden for so many years, and he displayed so great facility and art in this work that nothing more could be desired, in fact, with regard to design, judgment, and mastery in handling the chisel. In the same church, below the tramezzo, and beside the scene painted by Taddeo Gaddi, he made a crucifix of wood with extraordinary care, and when he had finished this, thinking that he had made a very rare work, he showed it to Filippo di Ser Brunellesco, who was very much his friend, wishing to have his opinion. Filippo, whom the words of Donato had led to expect something much better, smiled slightly on seeing it. Donato, perceiving this, besought him by all the friendship between them to tell him his opinion, whereupon Filippo, who was most obliging, replied that it appeared to him that Donato had placed a ploughman on the cross, and not a body like that of Jesus Christ, which was most delicate and in all its parts the most perfect human form that was ever born. Donato, hearing himself censured, and that more sharply than he expected, whereas he was hoping to be praised, replied, "If it were as easy to make this figure as to judge it, my Christ would appear to thee to be Christ and not a ploughman. Take wood, therefore, and try to make one thyself." Filippo, without another word, returned home and set to work to make a crucifix, without letting anyone know, and seeking to surpass Donato, in order not to confound his own judgment, after many months he brought it to the height of perfection. This done, he invited Donato one morning to dine with him, and Donato accepted the invitation. Whereupon, as they were going together to the house of Filippo, they came to the Mercato Vecchio, where Filippo bought some things and gave them to Donato, saying, "Do thou go with these things to the house and wait for me there. I am coming in a moment." Donato, therefore, entering the house and going into the hall, saw the crucifix of Filippo placed in a good light, and stopping short to study it, he found it so perfectly finished, that being overcome and full of amazement, like one distraught, he spread out his hands, which were holding up his apron, whereupon the eggs, the cheese, and all the other things fell to the ground, and everything was broken to pieces. But he was still marvelling and standing like one possessed, when Filippo came up and said with a laugh, "What is thy intention, Donato? And what are we to have for dinner, now that thou hast upset everything?" "For my part," answered Donato, "I have had my share for this morning. If thou must have thine, take it. It is thy work to make Christ, and mine to make ploughmen." In the church of San Giovanni, in the same city, Donato made a tomb for Pope Giovanni Coscia, who had been deposed from the pontificate by the Council of Constance. This tomb he was commissioned to make by Cosimo de' Medici, who was very much the friend of the said Coscia. He wrought therein with his own hand the figure of the dead man in gilded bronze, together with the marble statues of Hope and Charity that are there, and his pupil Michelozzo made the figure of Faith. In the same church, opposite to this work, there is a wooden figure by the hand of Donato of St. Mary Magdalene in penitence, very beautiful and excellently wrought, showing her wasted away by her fastings and abstinence, insomuch that it displays in all its parts an admirable perfection of anatomical knowledge. On a column of granite in the Mercato Vecchio there is a figure of Abundance in hard grey stone by the hand of Donato, standing quite by itself, so well wrought that it is consummately praised by craftsmen and by all good judges of art. The column on which this statue is placed was formerly in San Giovanni, where there are the others of granite supporting the gallery within. It was removed, and its place was taken by a fluted column, on which, in the middle of that temple, there once stood the statue of Mars, which was taken away when the Florentines were converted to the faith of Jesus Christ. The same man, while still a youth, made a figure of the prophet Daniel in marble for the façade of Santa Maria del Fiore, and afterwards one of St. John the Evangelist, seated, 4 braccia high, and clothed in a simple garment, which figure is much extolled. On one corner of the same place, on the side that faces towards the Via del Cocomero, there is an old man between two columns, more akin to the ancient manner than any other work that there is to be seen by the hand of Donato, the head revealing the thoughts that length of years brings to those who are exhausted by time and labour. Within the said church, likewise, he made the ornament for the organ, which stands over the door of the old sacristy, with those figures so boldly sketched, as it has been said, that they appear to the eye to have actual life and movement. Wherefore it may be said of this man that he worked as much with his judgment as with his hands, seeing that many things are wrought which appear beautiful in the rooms where they are made, and afterwards, on being taken thence and set in another place, in a different light or at a greater height, present a different appearance, and turn out the contrary to what they appeared. Whereas Donato made his figures in such a manner that in the room where he was working they did not appear half as good as they turned out to be in the positions where they were placed. For the new sacristy of the same church he made a design for those boys who uphold the festoons that go round the frieze, and likewise the design for the figures that were wrought in the glass of the round window which is below the cupola, namely, that one which contains the coronation of Our Lady, which design is greatly superior to those of the other round windows, as it is clearly evident. For San Michele in Orto, in the said city, he wrought the marble statue of St. Peter, which is to be seen there, a most masterly and admirable figure for the Guild of Butchers. And for the Guild of Linen Manufacturers he wrought the figure of St. Mark the Evangelist, which, after being commissioned to make it in company with Filippo Brunelleschi, he finished by himself with the consent of Filippo. This figure was wrought by Donato with so great judgment that its excellence was not recognized while it stood on the ground by those who had no judgment, and the consuls of that guild were inclined to refuse to have it put into place, whereupon Donato besought them to let him set it on high, saying that he wished to work on it and to show them a different figure as the result. His request being granted, he covered it up for a fortnight, and then uncovered it without having otherwise touched it, filling every one with wonder. For the Guild of Armourers he made a most spirited figure of St. George in armour, in the head of which there may be seen the beauty of youth, courage, and valour in arms, and a proud and terrible ardour, and there is a marvellous suggestion of life bursting out of the stone. It is certain that no modern figure in marble has yet shown such vivacity and such spirit as nature and art produced in this one by means of the hand of Donato. In the base that supports the shrine enclosing that figure, he wrought in marble the story of the saint killing the dragon in low relief, wherein there is a horse that is much esteemed and greatly extolled. In the frontal he made a half-length figure of God the Father in low relief. Opposite to the church of the said oratory, he wrought the marble shrine for the Mercatantia, following the ancient order known as Corinthian, and departing entirely from the German manner. This shrine was meant to contain 2 statues, but he refused to make them because he could not come to an agreement about the price. After his death these figures were made in bronze by Andrea del Verrocchio, as it will be told. For the main front of the campanile of Santa Maria del Fiore he wrought 4 figures in marble, 5 braccia in height, of which the 2 in the middle are portrayed from life, one being Francesco Soderini as a youth, and the other Giovanni di Barduccio Cherichini, now called Il Zuccone. The latter was held to be a very rare work, and the most beautiful that Donato ever made, and when he wished to take an oath that would command belief, he was wont to say, "By the faith that I place in my Zuccone," and the while that he was working on it, he would keep gazing at it and saying, "Speak, speak, play, take thee, speak." Over the door of the campanile, on the side facing the canon's house, he made Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac, with another prophet, and these figures were placed between 2 other statues. For the signoria of that city he made a casting in metal which was placed under an arch of their loggia in the piazza, representing Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes, a work of great excellence and mastery, which, if one considers the simplicity of the garments and aspect of Judith on the surface, reveals very clearly below the surface the great spirit of that woman and the assistance given to her by God, even as one sees the effect of wine and sleep in the expression of Holofernes, and death in his limbs, which have lost all life and are shown cold and limp. This work was so well executed by Donato that the casting came out delicate and very beautiful, and it was afterwards finished so excellently that it is a very great marvel to behold. The base likewise, which is a baluster of granite, simple in design, appears full of grace and presents an aspect pleasing to the eye. He was so well satisfied with this work that he deigned to place his name on it, which he had not done on the others, and it is seen in these words: Donatelli Opus. In the courtyard of the palace of the said Signori there is a life-size David, nude and in bronze. Having cut off the head of Goliath, he is raising one foot and placing it on him, holding a sword in his right hand. This figure is so natural in its vivacity and its softness that it is almost impossible for craftsmen to believe that it was not moulded on the living form. This statue once stood in the courtyard of the house of the Medici, but it was transported to the said place on the exile of Cosimo. In our own day, Duke Cosimo, having made a fountain on the spot occupied by this statue, had it removed, and it is being kept for a very large courtyard that he intends to make at the back of the palace, that is, where the lions formerly stood. In the hall, where there is the clock of Lorenzo della Volpaia, on the left, there is a very beautiful David in marble. Between his legs, under his feet, he has the head of the dead Goliath, and in his hand he holds the sling wherewith he slew him. In the first courtyard of the house of the Medici there are 8 medallions of marble, wherein there are copies of ancient cameos, and of the reverse side of medals, with certain scenes, all made by him and very beautiful, which are built into the frieze between the windows and the architrave above the arches of the loggie. In like manner he restored an ancient statue of Marsyas in white marble, which was placed at the entrance of the garden, and a great number of ancient heads, which were placed over the doors, were restored and embellished by him with wings and diamonds, the emblem of Cosimo, wrought very well in stucco. He made a very lovely vessel of granite, which poured forth water, and he wrought a similar one, which also pours forth water for the garden of the Pazzi in Florence. In the sad palace of the Medici there are Madonnas of marble and bronze made in low relief, besides some scenes in marble, with most beautiful figures, marvellous in their flat relief. So great was the love that Cosimo bore to the talent of Donato, that he kept him continually at work, and Donato, on the other hand, bore so great love to Cosimo that he could divine his patron's every wish from the slightest sign, and obeyed him in all things. It is said that a Genoese merchant caused Donato to make a life-size head of bronze, which was very beautiful and also very light, because it had to be carried to a great distance, and that the commission for this work came to him through the recommendation of Cosimo. Now, when the head was finished, and the merchant came to pay for it, it appeared to him that Donato was asking too much, wherefore the matter was referred to Cosimo, who had the head carried to the upper court of the palace and placed between the battlements that overlook the street, to the end that it might be seen better. When Cosimo sought to settle the difference, he found the offer of the merchant very far from the demand of Donato, and he turned around and said that it was too little. Whereupon the merchant, thinking it too much, said that Donato had wrought it in a month or little more, and that this meant a gain of more than half a florin a day. Donato, thinking this too much of an insult, turned round in anger, and said to the merchant that in the 100th part of an hour he would have been able to spoil the value of a year's labour, and giving the head a push, he sent it flying straightway into the street below, where it broke into 1,000 pieces, saying to him that this showed that he was more used to bargaining for beans than for statues. Wherefore the merchant, regretting his meanness, offered to give him double the sum if he would make another, but neither his promises nor the entreaties of Cosimo could induce Donato to make it again. In the houses of the Martelli there are many scenes in marble and in bronze, among others a David 3 braccia high, with many other works presented by him as a free gift to that family, in proof of the devotion and love that he bore them. Above all, a St. John of marble, made by him in the round and 3 braccia high, a very rare work, which is today in the house of the heirs of Roberto Martelli. With regard to this work, a legal agreement was made to the effect that it should be neither pledged nor sold nor given away without heavy penalties, as a testimony and token of the affection shown by them to Donato, and by him to them, out of gratitude that he had learned his art through the protection and the opportunities that he received from them. He also made a tomb of marble for an archbishop, which was sent to Naples and is in San Angelo di Seggio di Nido. In this tomb there are 3 figures in the round that support the sarcophagus with their heads, and on the sarcophagus itself is a scene in low relief, so beautiful that it commands infinite praise. In the house of the Count of Matalone, in the same city, there is the head of a horse, by the hand of Donato, so beautiful that many take it for an antique. In the township of Prato he wrought the marble pulpit where the girdle is shown, in which, in several compartments, he carved a dance of children, so beautiful and so admirable, that he may be said to have demonstrated the perfection of his art no less in this work than in his others. To support this pulpit, moreover, he made 2 capitals of bronze, one of which is still there, while the other was carried away by the Spaniards who sacked that district. It came to pass about this time that the Signoria of Venice, hearing of his fame, sent for him, to the end that he might make the monument of Gattamelata in the city of Padua. Wherefore he went there right willingly, and made the bronze horse that is on the Piazza di Sant' Antonio, wherein are perceived the panting and neighing of the horse with great spirit and pride, most vividly expressed by his art in the figure of the rider. And Donato proved himself such a master in the proportions and excellence of so great a casting, that he can truly bear comparison with any ancient craftsman in movement, design, art, proportion, and diligence. Wherefore it not only astonished all who saw it then, but continues to astonish every person who sees it at the present day. The Paduans, moved by this, did their utmost to make him their fellow citizen, and sought to detain him with every sort of endearment. In order to keep him in their midst, they commissioned him to make the stories of St. Anthony of Padua on the predella of the high altar in the church of the Friars Minor, which are in low relief, wrought with so great judgment, that the most excellent masters of that art stand marvelling and amazed before them, as they consider their beautiful and varied compositions, with the great abundance of extraordinary figures and diminishing perspectives. Very beautiful, likewise, are the Marys that he made on the altar docile, lamenting the dead Christ. In the house of one of the Count's Capodilista he wrought the skeleton of a horse in wood, which is still to be seen today without the neck, wherein the various parts are joined together with so much method, that, if one considers the manner of this work, one can judge of the ingenuity of his brain and the greatness of his mind. In a convent of nuns he made a Saint Sebastian in wood at the request of a chaplain, a Florentine, who was their friend and an intimate of his own. This man brought him a figure of that saint that they had, old and clumsy, beseeching him to make the new one like it. Wherefore Donato strove to imitate it, in order to please the chaplain and the nuns, but, although he imitated it, clumsy as it was, he could not help showing in his own the usual excellence of his art. Together with this figure he made many others in clay and in stucco, and on one end of an old piece of marble that the said nuns had in their garden he carved a very beautiful Madonna. Throughout that whole city, likewise, there are innumerable works by his hand, by reason of which he was held by the Paduans to be a marvel, and was praised by every man of understanding. But he determined to return to Florence, saying that if he remained any longer in Padua he would forget everything that he knew, being so greatly praised there by all, and that he was glad to return to his own country, where he would gain nothing but censure, since such censure would urge him to study and would enable him to attain to greater glory. Having departed from Padua, therefore, he returned by way of Venice, where, as a mark of his friendliness towards the Florentine people, he made them a present of a St. John the Baptist, wrought by him in wood, with very great diligence and study, for their chapel in the church of the Friars Minor. In the city of Faenza he carved a St. John and a St. Jerome in wood, which are no less esteemed than his other works. Afterwards, having returned to Tuscany, he made a marble tomb, with a very beautiful scene, in the Pieve of Montepulciano, and a lavatory of marble, on which Andrea Verrocchio also worked, in the sacristy of San Lorenzo in Florence. And, in the house of Lorenzo della Stufa, he wrought some heads and figures that are very spirited and vivacious. Then, departing from Florence, he betook himself to Rome, in order to try to imitate the antiques to the best of his ability. And during this time, while studying these, he made a tabernacle of the sacrament in stone, which is to be seen in San Pietro at the present day. Passing through Siena on his way back to Florence, he undertook to make a door of bronze for the baptistery of San Giovanni, and he had already made the wooden model, and the wax moulds were almost finished and successfully covered with the outer mould, ready for the casting, when there arrived, on his way back from Rome, one Bernardetto di Monapapera, a Florentine goldsmith and an intimate friend of Donato, who wrought upon him so strongly both with words and in other ways, either for some business of his own or for some other reason, that he brought him back to Florence, wherefore that work remained unfinished, nay, not begun. There only remained in the office of works of the Duomo in that city a St. John the Baptist in bronze by his hand, with the right arm missing from the elbow downwards, and this Donato is said to have done because he had not been paid in full. Having returned to Florence, therefore, he wrought the sacristy of San Lorenzo in stucco for Cosimo de' Medici, making 4 medallions on the pendentives of the vault containing stories of the evangelists, with grounds in perspective, partly painted and partly in low relief. And in the said place he made 2 very beautiful little doors of bronze in low relief, with the apostles, martyrs, and confessors. And above these he made some flat niches, one containing a St. Lawrence and a St. Stephen, and the other San Cosimo and San Damiano. In the transept of the church he executed 4 saints in stucco, each 5 braccia high, which are wrought in a masterly manner. He also designed the bronze pulpits that contain the Passion of Christ, a work displaying design, force, invention, and an abundance of figures and buildings. But these his old age prevented him from executing, and his pupil Bertoldo finished them and brought them to the utmost perfection. For Santa Maria del Fiore he made 2 colossal figures of brick and stucco, which are placed by way of ornament without the church at the corners of the chapels. Over the door of San Croce there is still to be seen a St. Louis, wrought by him in bronze, 5 braccia high. For this someone criticized him, saying that it was stupid and perhaps the least excellent work that he had ever made, and he answered that he had made it so of set purpose, seeing that the saint had been stupid to give up his throne and become a monk. The same man made the head of the wife of the said Cosimo de' Medici in bronze, and this head is preserved in the guardaroba of the Lord Duke Cosimo, wherein there are many other works in bronze and marble by the hand of Donato. Among others, a Madonna with the Child in her arms, sunk in the marble in flat relief, which is the most beautiful work that it is possible to see, and the rather as it is surrounded by a border of scenes done in miniature by Fra Bartolomeo, which are admirable, as it will be told in the proper place. The said Lord Duke has a very beautiful, nay, miraculous crucifix in bronze, by the hand of Donato, in his study, wherein there are innumerable rare antiques and most beautiful medals. In the same guardaroba there is a bronze panel containing the Passion of our Lord in low relief, with a great number of figures, and in another panel, also in metal, there is another crucifixion. In like manner, in the house of the heirs of Jacopo Capponi, who was an excellent citizen and a true gentleman, there is a marble panel with a Madonna in half relief, which is held to be a very rare work. Messer Antonio de' Nobili, who was treasurer to his Excellency, had in his house a marble panel by the hand of Donato, in which there is a half-length Madonna in low relief, so beautiful that the said Messer Antonio valued it as much as all his possessions. Nor is it less valued by his son Giulio, a youth of singular goodness and judgment, a friend to lovers of art and to all men of excellence. In the house of Giovan Battista Dagnol Doni, a gentleman of Florence, there is a Mercury of metal in the round by the hand of Donato, 1 braccio and a half in height, and clothed in a certain bizarre manner, which work is truly very beautiful, and no less rare than the others that adorn his most beautiful house. Bartolomeo Gondi, of whom we have spoken in the life of Giotto, has a Madonna in half relief by the hand of Donato, wrought with so great love and diligence that it is not possible to see anything better, or to imagine the fancifulness which he gave to her headdress and the loveliness that he put into the garments which she is wearing. In like manner, Messer Lelio Torelli, first auditor and secretary to our lord the Duke, and no less devoted a lover of all the honourable sciences, arts, and professions, than he is excellent as a jurist, has a marble panel of Our Lady by the hand of the same Donatello. But if one were to give a complete account of his life and of the works that he made, it would be a far longer story than it is our intention to give in writing the lives of our craftsmen, seeing that he put his hand not only to great things, of which there has been enough said, but also to the smallest things of art, making the arms of families on the chimney-pieces and on the fronts of the houses of citizens, a most beautiful example of which may be seen in the house of the Sommai, which is opposite to that of the baker della Vacca. For the family of the Martelli, moreover, he made a coffin in the form of a cradle wrought of wicker-work, to serve for a tomb. But it is beneath the church of San Lorenzo, because no tombs of any kind are to be seen above, save only the epitaph of the tomb of Cosimo de' Medici, and even that one has its entrance below, like the others. It is said that Simone, the brother of Donato, having wrought the model for the tomb of Pope Martin V, sent for Donato to the end that he might see it before it was cast. Going to Rome, therefore, Donato found himself in that city at the very moment when the Emperor Sigismund was there to receive the crown from Pope Eugenius IV, wherefore he was forced, in company with Simone, to occupy himself with making the magnificent preparations for that festival, whereby he acquired very great fame and honour. In the guardaroba of Signor Ghibaldo, Duke of Urbino, there is a very beautiful head of marble by the hand of the same man, and it is believed that it was given to the ancestors of the said Duke by the magnificent Giuliano de' Medici, at the time when he was staying at that court, which was full of most cultured gentlemen. In short, the talent of Donato was such, and he was so admirable in all his actions, that he may be said to have been one of the first to give light by his practice, judgment, and knowledge to the art of sculpture and of good design among the moderns. And he deserves all the more commendation because in his day, apart from the columns, sarcophagi, and triumphal arches, there were no antiquities revealed above the earth. And it was through him chiefly that there arose in Cosimo de' Medici the desire to introduce into Florence the antiquities that were and are in the house of the Medici, all of which he restored with his own hand. He was most liberal, gracious, and courteous, and more careful for his friends than for himself. Nor did he give thought to money, but kept his in a basket suspended by a cord from the ceiling, wherefore all his workmen and friends could take what they needed without saying a word to him. He passed his old age most joyously, and having become decrepit, he had to be succoured by Cosimo and by others of his friends, being no longer able to work. It is said that Cosimo, being at the point of death, recommended him to the care of his son Piero, who, as a most diligent executor of his father's wishes, gave him a farm at Cafaggiuolo, which produced enough to enable him to live in comfort. At this Donato made great rejoicing, thinking that he was thus more than secure from the danger of dying of hunger. But he had not held it a year before he returned to Piero and gave it back to him by public contract, declaring that he refused to lose his peace of mind by having to think of household cares and listen to the importunity of the peasant, who kept pestering him every third day, now because the wind had unroofed his dovecote, now because his cattle had been seized by the commune for taxes, and now because a storm had robbed him of his wine and his fruit. He was so weary and disgusted with all this, that he would rather die of hunger than have to think of so many things. Piero laughed at the simplicity of Donato, and in order to deliver him from this torment, he accepted the farm, for on this Donato insisted, and assigned him an allowance of the same value or more from his own bank, to be paid in cash, which was handed over to him every week in the due proportion owing to him. whereby he was greatly contented. Thus, as a servant and friend of the house of Medici, he lived happily and free from care for the rest of his life. When he had reached the age of 83, however, he was so palsied that he could no longer work in any fashion, and took to spending all his time in bed, in a poor little house that he had in the Via del Cocomero, near the nunnery of San Nicolo, where, growing worse from day to day, and wasting away little by little, he died on December 13th, 1466. He was buried in the church of San Lorenzo, near the tomb of Cosimo, as he had himself directed, to the end that his dead body might be near him, even as he had been ever near him in spirit when alive. His death caused great grief to his fellow citizens, to the craftsmen, and to all who knew him when living. Wherefore, in order to honour him more after death than they had done in his life, they gave him most honourable obsequies in the aforesaid church, and he was accompanied to the grave by all the painters, architects, sculptors, and goldsmiths, and by almost all the people of that city, which continued for a long time to compose in his honour various kinds of verses in divers tongues, whereof it must suffice us to cite the few that are to be read below. But before I come to the epitaphs, it will not be amiss to relate the following story of him as well. When he had fallen sick, and only a little before his death, certain of his relatives went to visit him, and after they had greeted him, as is customary, and condoled with him, they said that it was his duty to leave them a farm that he had in the district of Prato, although it was small, and produced a very meagre income, and they prayed him straitly to do it. Hearing this, Donato, who showed something of the good in all that he did, said to them, I cannot satisfy you, my kinsmen, because I intend to leave it, as it appears to me reasonable, to the peasant who has always worked it and endured great labour thereby, and not to you, who, without having bestowed upon it anything more profitable than the thought of possessing it, expect me to leave it to you because of this your visit. Go, and may God bless you. Of a truth, such relatives, who have no love unconnected with advantage or with the hope of it, should be ever treated in this fashion. Sending therefore a notary, he left the said farm to the labourer who had always worked it, and who perchance had behaved better to him in his need than those relatives had done. His art possessions he left to his pupils, namely Bertoldo, a sculptor of Florence, who imitated him closely enough, as may be seen from a beautiful battle between men on horseback, wrought in bronze, which is now in the guardaroba of the Lord Duke Cosimo, Nanni d'Antonio di Banco, who died before him, and Rossellino, Desiderio, and Vellano da Padova. In short, it may be said that every man who has sought to do good work in relief since the death of Donato has been his disciple. He was resolute in draughtsmanship, and he made his drawings with such mastery and boldness that they have no equals, as may be seen in my book, wherein I have figures drawn by his hand, both clothed and nude, animals that make all who see them marvel, and other most beautiful things of that kind. His portrait was made by Paolo Uccello, as it has been said in his life. The epitaphs are as follows. Sculptura huius monumenti a Florentinis fieri voluit Donatello, ut pote homini, qui ei, quod iam diu optimis artificibus multisque seculis tum nobilitatis tum nominis acquisitum fuerat, injuriave tempor. Perdiderat ipse unus una vita infinitisque operibus cumulatis. Restituerit, et patriae benemerenti huius restitute virtutis palmam reportarit. Excudit nemo spirantia mollius era, vera cano, cernes marmora viva loqui. Grecorum sileat prisca admirabilis etas, cum pedibus statuas continuisser hodon. Nectere namque magis fuerant, hec vincula digna istius egregias artificis statuas. Quanto condotta mano alla scultura già fecer molti, or sol donato ha fatto, renduto a vita amarmi affetto ed atto. Che più se non parlar può dar natura? The world remained so full of his works that it may be affirmed right truly that no craftsman ever worked more than he did. For, delighting in every kind of work, he put his hand to anything, without considering whether it was of little or of great value. Nevertheless, it was indispensable to sculpture, this vast activity of Donato, in making figures in every kind of relief, full, half, low, and the lowest. Because, whereas in the good times of the ancient Greeks and Romans, it was by means of many that it became perfect, he alone, by the multitude of his works, brought it back to marvellous perfection in our own age. Wherefore, craftsmen should trace the greatness of this art rather to him than to any man born in modern times, seeing that, besides rendering the difficulties of the art easy, in the multitude of his works he combined together invention, design, practice, judgment, and every other quality that ever can or should be looked for in a divine genius. Donato was very resolute and ready, executing all his works with consummate facility, and he always accomplished much more than he had promised. He left all his work to be completed by his pupil Bertoldo, and particularly the bronze pulpits of San Lorenzo, which were afterwards finished in great part by him, and brought to the state in which they are seen in the said church. I will not forbear to say that the most learned and very reverend Don Vincenzo Borghini, of whom mention has been made above with regard to some other matter, has collected into a large book innumerable drawings by excellent painters and sculptors, both ancient and modern, and on the ornamental borders of 2 leaves opposite to each other, which contain drawings by the hand of Donato and of Michelangelo Buonarroti, he has written, with much judgment, these 2 Greek epigrams: on Donatos, Greek, e Donatos Buonarrotitei, and on Michelangelo's, Greek, e Buonarrotus Donatitei, which mean in Latin, aut Donatus Buonarrotum exprimit et refert, aut Buonarrotus Donatum, and in our own tongue, either the spirit of Donato works in Buonarrotto, or that of Buonarrotto began by working in Donato. End of Donato Donatello. Section 28 of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 2, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston du de VERE. Life of Michelozzo Michelozzi, Sculptor and Architect of Florence. If every man who lives in this world were to realize that he may have to live when he is no longer able to work, there would not be so many reduced to begging in their old age for that which they consumed without any restraint in their youth, when their large and abundant gains, blinding their true judgment, made them spend more than was necessary and much more than was expedient. For, seeing how coldly a man is looked upon who has fallen from wealth to poverty, every man should strive, honestly, however, and maintaining the proper mean, to avoid having to beg in his old age. And whosoever will act like Michelozzo, who did not imitate his master Donato in this respect, although he did in his virtues, will live honourably all the course of his life, and will not be forced in his last years to go about miserably hunting for the wherewithal to live. Now Michelozzo applied himself in his youth to sculpture under Donatello, and also to design, and although he realized their difficulties, nevertheless he went on ever practising so diligently with clay, with wax, and with marble, that he ever showed ability and great talent in the works that he made afterwards. There was one art in which he surpassed many, and even his own self, for, after Brunellesco, he was held to be the most methodical architect of his times, and the one who was best able to arrange and contrive palaces, convents, and houses for human habitation, and who designed them with the greatest judgment, as will be told in the proper place. Of this man Donatello availed himself for many years, because he was very well practised in working marble and in the business of casting in bronze, of which we have proof in a tomb in San Giovanni at Florence, which was made by Donatello, as it has been said, for Pope Giovanni Coscia, since the greater part was executed by Michelozzo, and there we can see a very beautiful marble statue by his hand, 2 braccia and a half in height, representing Faith, in company with one of Hope and one of Charity made by Donatello of the same size, which does not suffer by comparison with the others. Moreover, above the door of the sacristy and the office of works, opposite to San Giovanni, Michelozzo made a little St. John in full relief, wrought with diligence, which was much extolled. Michelozzo was so intimate with Cosimo de' Medici that the latter, recognizing his genius, caused him to make the model for the house and palace at the corner of the Via Larga beside San Giovannino, for he thought that the one made by Filippo di Ser Brunellesco, as it has been said, was too sumptuous and magnificent, and more likely to stir up envy among his fellow citizens than to confer grandeur or adornment on the city or bring comfort to himself. Wherefore, being pleased with the model that Michelozzo had made, he had the building brought to completion under his direction, in the manner that we see at the present day, with all the beautiful and useful arrangements and graceful adornments that are seen therein, which have majesty and grandeur in their simplicity. And Michelozzo deserves all the greater praise in that this was the first palace which was built in that city on modern lines, and which was divided up into rooms both useful and most beautiful. The cellars are excavated to more than half their depth underground, namely 4 braccia below, with 3 above for the sake of light, and there are also wine cellars and store rooms. On the ground floor there are 2 courtyards with magnificent loggie, on which open saloons, chambers, antechambers, studies, closets, stove rooms, kitchens, wells, and staircases, both secret and public, all most convenient. On each floor there are apartments with accommodation for a whole family, with all the conveniences that are proper not only to a private citizen, such as Cosimo then was, but even to the most splendid and most honourable of kings, wherefore in our own times kings, emperors, popes, and all the most illustrious princes of Europe have been comfortably lodged there, to the infinite credit both of the magnificence of Cosimo and of the excellent ability of Michelozzo in architecture. In the year 1433, when Cosimo was driven into exile, Michelozzo, who loved him very greatly and was most faithful to him, accompanied him of his own free will to Venice, and insisted on remaining with him all the time that he stayed there. And in that city, besides many designs and models that he made for private dwellings and public buildings, and decorations for the friends of Cosimo and for many gentlemen, he built, at the command and expense of Cosimo, the library of the monastery of San Giorgio Maggiore, a seat of the Black Friars of Santa Giustina. And this was not only finished with regards to walls, bookshelves, woodwork, and other adornments, but was also filled with many books. Such was the occupation and amusement of Cosimo during that exile, from which he was recalled to his country in the year 1434, whereupon he returned almost in triumph, and Michelozzo with him. Now, while Michelozzo was in Florence, the Palazzo Pubblico della Signoria began to threaten to collapse, for some columns in the courtyard were giving way, either because there was too much weight pressing on them, or because their foundations were weak and awry, or even perchance because they were made of pieces badly joined and put together. Whatever may have been the reason, the matter was put into the hands of Michelozzo, who accepted the undertaking willingly, because he had provided against a similar peril near San Barnaba in Venice in the following manner. A gentleman had a house that was in danger of falling down, and he entrusted the matter to Michelozzo, wherefore he, according to what Michelagnolo Buonarroti once told me, caused a column to be made in secret, and prepared a number of props, and hiding everything in a boat, into which he entered together with some builders, in one night he propped up the house and replaced the column. Michelozzo, therefore, emboldened by this experience, averted the danger from the palace, doing honour both to himself and to those by whose favour he had received such a charge, and he refounded and rebuilt the columns in the manner wherein they stand today. First, he made a stout framework of props and thick beams, standing upright to support the centres of the arches, made of nutwood, and upholding the vaulting, so that this came to support equally the weight that was previously borne by the columns. Then, little by little, removing those that were made of pieces badly joined together, he replaced them with others made of pieces and wrought with diligence, in such a manner that the building did not suffer in any way, and has never moved a hair's breadth. And in order that his columns might be known from the others, he made some of them at the corners with 8 sides, with capitals that have the foliage carved in the modern fashion, and some round, and all are very easily distinguished from the old columns that Arnolfo made formerly. Afterwards, by the advice of Michelozzo, it was ordained by those who then governed the city that the arches of those columns should be unburdened and relieved of the weight of the walls that rested upon them, that the whole courtyard should be rebuilt from the arches upwards, with a row of windows in modern fashion, similar to those that he made for Cosimo in the courtyard of the palace of the Medici, and that designs in rustic work should be carved on the walls, for the reception of those golden lilies that are still seen there at the present day. All this Michelozzo did with great promptitude, and on the second tier, directly above the windows of the said courtyard, he made some round windows, so as to have them differently from the aforesaid windows, to give light to the rooms on that floor, which are over those of the first floor, where there is now the Sala de Dugento. The third floor, where the Signori and the Gonfalonier lived, he made more ornate, and on the side towards San Piero Scheraggio he arranged a series of apartments for the Signori, who had previously slept all together in one and the same room. These apartments consisted of 8 for the Signori and a larger one for the Gonfalonier, and they all opened on a corridor which had windows overlooking the courtyard. Above this he made another series of commodious rooms for the household of the palace, in one of which, used today as the treasury, there is a portrait by the hand of Giotto of Charles, Duke of Calabria, son of King Robert, kneeling before a Madonna. There also he made apartments for the bailiffs, ushers, trumpeters, musicians, pipers, mace-bearers, court servants, and heralds, with all the other apartments that are required in such a palace. On the upper part of the gallery, moreover, he made a stone cornice that went right round the courtyard, and beside it a water cistern that was filled by the rains, to make some artificial fountains play at certain times. Michelozzo also directed the restoration of the chapel wherein mass is heard, and beside it many rooms, with very rich ceilings painted with golden lilies on a ground of blue. He had other ceilings made both for the upper and the lower rooms of the palace, covering up all the old ceilings that had been made before in the ancient manner. In short, he gave it all the perfection that was demanded by so great a building, and he contrived to convey the water from the wells right up to the highest floor, to which it could be drawn up by means of a wheel more easily than was usual. One thing alone the genius of Michelozzo could not remedy, namely, the public staircase, because it was badly conceived from the beginning, badly situated, awkwardly built, steep, and without lights, while from the first floor upwards the steps were of wood. He laboured to such purpose, however, that he made a flight of round steps at the entrance of the courtyard, and a door with pilasters of hard stone, and most beautiful capitals carved by his hand, besides a well-designed cornice with a double architrave, in the frieze of which he placed all the arms of the commune. And what is more, he made the whole staircase of hard stone up to the floor where the Signori lived, fortifying it at the top and half-way up with a portcullis at each point, in case of tumults. And at the head of the staircase he made a door which was called the catena, beside which there was ever standing an usher, who opened or closed it, according as he was commanded by those in authority. He strengthened the tower of the campanile, which had cracked by reason of the weight of that part which stands out over space on corbels on the side towards the piazza, with very stout bands of iron. Finally, he improved and restored that palace so greatly, that he was therefore commended by the whole city, and made, besides other rewards, a member of the college, which is one of the most honourable magistracies in Florence. And if it should appear to any one that I have perchance spoken at greater length about this building than was needful, I deserve to be excused, because, after having shown in the life of Arnolfo, in connection with its original erection, which was in the year 1298, that it was built out of the square and wholly wanting in reasonable proportion, with unequal columns in the courtyard, arches both large and small, inconvenient stairs, and rooms awry and badly proportioned, it was necessary for me to show also to what condition it was brought by the intellect and judgment of Michelozzo, although even he did not arrange it in such a manner that it could be inhabited comfortably without very great inconvenience and discomfort. Finally, when the Lord Duke Cosimo came to occupy it in the year 1538, His Excellency began to bring it into better form. But since those architects who served the Duke for many years in that work were never able to grasp or to carry out his conception, he determined to see whether he could effect the restoration without spoiling the old part, in which there was no little of the good, giving better order, convenience, and proportion, according to the plan that he had in mind, to the awkward and inconvenient stairs and apartments. Sending to Rome, therefore, for Giorgio Vasari, painter and architect of Arezzo, who was working for Pope Julius III, he commissioned him not only to put in order the rooms that he had caused to be begun in the upper part of the side opposite to the corn market, which were out of the straight with regard to the ground plan, but also to consider whether the interior of the palace could not, without spoiling the work already done, be brought to such a form that it might be possible to go all over it from one part to another and from one apartment to another by means of staircases both secret and public, with an ascent as easy as possible. Thereupon, while the said rooms, already begun, were being adorned with gilded ceilings and scenes painted in oil, and with pictures in fresco on the walls, and others were being wrought in stucco, Giorgio took a tracing of the ground plan right round the whole of the palace, both the new part and the old. And then, having arranged, with no small labour and study, for the execution of all that he intended to do, he began to bring it little by little into a good form, and to unite, almost without spoiling any of the work already done, the disconnected rooms, which previously varied in height even on the same floor, some being high and others low. But, in order that the Duke might see the design of the whole, in the space of 6 months he had made a well-proportioned wooden model of the whole of that pile, which has the form and extent rather of a fortress than of a palace. According to this model, which gained the approval of the Duke, the building was united, and many commodious rooms were made, as well as convenient staircases, both public and secret, which give access to all the floors. And, in this manner, a burden was removed from the halls, which were formerly like public streets, for it had been impossible to ascend to the upper floors without passing through them. The whole was magnificently adorned with varied and diverse pictures, and finally the roof of the great hall was raised 12 braccia above its former height, insomuch that, if Arnolfo, Michelozzo, and the others who laboured on the building from its first foundation onwards were to return to life, they would not recognize it. Nay, they would believe that it was not theirs, but a new erection and a different edifice. But let us now return to Michelozzo. The church of San Giorgio had just been given to the friars of San Domenico da Fiesole, but they only remained there from about the middle of July to the end of January, for Cosimo de' Medici and his brother Lorenzo obtained for them from Pope Eugenius the church and convent of San Marco, which was previously the seat of Silvestrine monks, to whom the said San Giorgio was given in exchange. And Cosimo and Lorenzo, being very devoted to religion and to divine service and worship, ordained that the said convent of San Marco should be rebuilt entirely anew after the design and model of Michelozzo, and should be made very vast and magnificent, with all the conveniences that the said friars could possibly desire. This work was begun in the year 1437, and the first part to be built was that opening out above the old refectory, opposite to the ducal stables, which Duke Lorenzo de' Medici formerly caused to be built. In this place 20 cells were built, the roof was put on, and the wooden furniture was made for the refectory, the whole being finished in the manner wherein it still stands today. But for some time the work was carried no further, for they had to wait to see what would be the end of a lawsuit that one Maestro Stefano, general of the said Silvestrines, had brought against the friars of San Marco with regard to that convent. This suit having concluded in favour of the said friars of San Marco, the building was once more continued. But since the principal chapel, which had been built by Serpino Bonaccorsi, had afterwards come into the hands of a lady of the Caponsacchi family, and from her to Mariotto Banchi, some lawsuit was fought out over this, and Mariotto, having upheld his rights, and having taken the said chapel from Agnolo della Casa, to whom the said Silverstrines had given or sold it, presented it to Cosimo de' Medici, who gave Mariotto 500 crowns in return for it. Later, after Cosimo had likewise bought from the Company of the Spirito Santo the site where the choir now stands, the chapel, the tribune, and the choir were built under the direction of Michelozzo, and completely furnished in the year 1439. Afterwards the library was made, 80 braccia in length and 18 in breadth, and vaulted both above and below, with 64 shelves of cypress wood filled with most beautiful books. After this the dormitory was finished, being brought to a square shape, and finally the cloister was completed, together with all the truly commodious apartments of that convent, which is believed to be the best designed, the most beautiful, and the most commodious that there is in Italy, thanks to the talent and industry of Michelozzo, who delivered it completely finished in the year 1452. It is said that Cosimo spent 36,000 ducats on this fabric, and that while it was building he gave the monks 366 ducats every year for their maintenance. Of the construction and consecration of this holy place we read in an inscription on marble over the door that leads into the sacristy in the following words: Cum hoc templum Marco Evangeliste dicatum magnificis sumptibus clari viri Cosmi Medicis tandem absolutum esset, Eugenius Quartus Romanus Pontifex maxima cardinalium archiepiscoporum episcoporum aliorumque sacerdotum frequentia comitatus id celeberrimo Epiphaniae die solemni more servato consecravit. Tum etiam quotannis omnibus qui eodem die festo annua statasque consecrationis ceremonias caste pieque celebrarint viserintve temporis luendis peccatis suis debiti septem annos totidemque quadragesimas apostolica remissit auctoritate anno 1442. In like manner Cosimo erected, from the design of Michelozzo, the novitiate of Santa Croce in Florence, with the chapel of the same, and the entrance that leads from the church to the sacristy, to the said novitiate, and to the staircase of the dormitory. These works are not inferior in beauty, convenience, and adornment to any building whatsoever of all those which the truly magnificent Cosimo de' Medici caused to be erected, or which Michelozzo carried into execution. And besides other parts, the door that leads from the church to the said places, which he made of grey stone, was much extolled in those times by reason of its novelty and of its beautifully made frontal, for it was then very little the custom to imitate the good manner of antique work, as this door does. Cosimo de' Medici also built, with the advice and design of Michelozzo, the palace of Cafaggiuolo in Mugello, giving it the form of a fortress with ditches around it, and he laid out farms, roads, gardens, fountains with groves round them, fowling places, and other appurtenances of a villa, all very splendid, and at a distance of 2 miles from the said palace, in a place called the Bosco a Frati, with the advice of Michelozzo, he carried out the building of a convent for the Frati de Zoccoli of the order of St. Francis, which is something very beautiful. At Trebbio, likewise, he made many other improvements which are still to be seen, and at a distance of 2 miles from Florence also he built the palatial Villa of Careggi, which was very rich and magnificent, and thither Michelozzo brought the water for the fountain that is seen there at the present day. For Giovanni, son of Cosimo de' Medici, the same master built another magnificent and noble palace at Fiesole, sinking the foundations for the lower part in the brow of the hill, at great expense, but not without great advantage, for in that lower part he made vaults, cellars, stables, vat stores, and many other beautiful and commodious offices. And above, besides the chambers, halls, and other ordinary rooms, he made some for books, and certain others for music. In short, Michelozzo showed in this building how great was his skill in architecture, for, besides what has been mentioned, it was constructed in such a manner that, although it stands on that hill, it has never moved a hair's breadth. This palace finished, he built above it, almost on the summit of the hill, the church and convent of the Friars of San Girolamo, at the expense of the same man. The same Michelozzo made the design and model, which Cosimo sent to Jerusalem for the hospice that he caused to be erected there, for the pilgrims who visit the sepulchre of Christ. He also sent the design for 6 windows in the façade of San Pietro in Rome, which were made there afterwards with the arms of Cosimo de' Medici. But 3 of them were removed in our own day, and replaced by Pope Paul III, with others bearing the arms of the house of Farnese. After this, hearing that there was a lack of water at Santa Maria degli Angeli in Assisi, to the very great discomfort of the people who go there every year on August the 1st to receive absolution, Cosimo sent thither Michelozzo, who brought the water of a spring, which rose half-way up the brow of the hill, to the fountain, which he covered with a very rich and very lovely loggia resting on some columns made of separate pieces, and bearing the arms of Cosimo. Within the convent, also at the commission of Cosimo, he made many useful improvements for the friars, and these the magnificent Lorenzo de' Medici afterwards renewed with more adornment and at greater expense, besides presenting to that Madonna the image of her in wax, which is still to be seen there. Cosimo also caused the road that leads from the said Madonna degli Angeli to the city to be paved with bricks, nor did Michelozzo take his leave of those parts before he had made the design for the old citadel of Perugia. Having finally returned to Florence, he built a house on the Canto de' Tornaquinci for Giovanni Tornabuoni, similar in almost every way to the palace that he had made for Cosimo, save that the façade is not in rustic work and has no cornices above, but is quite plain. After the death of Cosimo, by whom Michelozzo had been loved as much as a dear friend can be loved, his son Piero caused him to build the marble chapel of the Crucifix in San Miniato sul Monte, and in the half-circle of the arch at the back of the said chapel, Michelozzo carved in low relief a falcon with a diamond, the emblem of Cosimo, father of Piero, which was truly a very beautiful work. After these things, the same Piero de' Medici, intending to build the chapel of the Nunziata in the church of the Servi, entirely of marble, besought Michelozzo, now an old man, to give him his advice in the matter, both because he greatly admired his talents, and because he knew how faithful a friend and servant he had been to his father Cosimo. This Michelozzo did, and the charge of constructing it was given to Pagno di Lapo Partigiani, a sculptor of Fiesole, who, as one who wished to include many things in a small space, showed many ideas in this work. This chapel is supported by 4 marble columns about 9 braccia high, made with double flutings in the Corinthian manner, with the bases and capitals variously carved and with double members. On the columns rest the architrave, frieze, and cornice, likewise with double members and carvings, and wrought with various things of fancy, and particularly with foliage and the emblems and arms of the Medici. Between these and other cornices made for another range of lights, there is a large inscription, very beautifully carved in marble. Below, between the 4 columns, forming the ceiling of the chapel, there is a coffer-work canopy of marble, all carved, full of enamels fired in a furnace, and of various fanciful designs in mosaic wrought with gold color and precious stones. The surface of the pavement is full of porphyry, serpentine, variegated marbles, and other very rare stones, put together and distributed with beautiful design. The said chapel is enclosed by a grille made of bronze ropes, with candelabra above fixed into an ornament of marble, which makes a very beautiful finish to the bronze and to the candelabra, and the door which closes the chapel in front is likewise of bronze and very well contrived. Piero left orders that the chapel should be lighted all round by 30 silver lamps, and this was done. Now, as these were ruined during the siege, the Lord Duke gave orders many years ago that new ones should be made, and the greater part of them are already finished, while the work still goes on. But in spite of this, there has never been a moment when there has not been the full number of lamps burning, according to the instructions of Piero, although, from the time when they were destroyed, they have not been of silver. To these adornments Pagno added a very large lily of copper, issuing from a vase which rests on the corner of the gilt and painted cornice of wood which holds the lamps. But this cornice does not support so great a weight by itself, for the whole is sustained by 2 branches of the lily, which are of iron painted green, and are fixed with lead into the corner of the marble cornice, holding those that are of copper suspended in the air. This work was truly made with judgment and invention, wherefore it is worthy of being much extolled as something beautiful and bizarre. Beside this chapel he made another on the side towards the cloister, which serves as a choir for the friars, with windows which take their light from the court and give it both to the said chapel, and also, since they stand opposite to 2 similar windows, to the room containing the little organ, which is by the side of the marble chapel. On the front of this choir there is a large press, in which the silver vessels of the Nunziata are kept, and on all these ornaments and throughout the whole are the arms and emblem of the Medici. Without the chapel of the Nunziata, and opposite to it, the same man made a large chandelier of bronze, 5 braccia in height, as well as the marble holy water font at the entrance of the church, and a St. John in the centre, which is a very beautiful work. Above the counter where the friars sell the candles, moreover, he made a half-length Madonna of marble, with the Child in her arms, in half-relief, of the size of life and very devout, and a similar work in the office of the Wardens of Works of Santa Maria del Fiore. Pagno also wrought some figures in San Miniato al Tedesco, in company with his master Donato, while a youth, and he made a tomb of marble in the church of San Martino in Lucca, opposite to the chapel of the Sacrament, for Messer Piero di Nocera, whose portrait there from nature. Filarete relates in the 25th book of his work that Francesco Sforza, 4th Duke of Milan, presented a very beautiful palace in Milan to the magnificent Cosimo de' Medici, and that Cosimo, in order to show the Duke how pleased he was with such a gift, not only adorned it richly with marbles and with carved woodwork, but also enlarged it under the direction of Michelozzo, making it 87 braccia and a half, whereas it had previously been only 84 braccia. Besides this, he had many pictures painted there, particularly the stories of the life of the Emperor Trajan in a loggia, wherein, among certain decorations, he caused Francesco Sforza himself to be portrayed with the Lady Bianca, his consort, Duchess of Milan, and also their children, with many other noblemen and great persons, and likewise the portraits of 8 emperors. And to these portraits Michelozzo added that of Cosimo, made by his own hand. Throughout all the apartments he placed the arms of Cosimo in divers fashions, with his emblem of the falcon and diamond. The said pictures were all by the hand of Vincenzo di Zoppa, a painter of no small repute at that time and in that country. It is recorded that the money that Cosimo spent in the restoration of this palace was paid by Pigello Portinari, a citizen of Florence, who then directed the bank and the accounts of Cosimo in Milan, and lived in the said palace. There are some works in marble and bronze by the hand of Michelozzo in Genoa, and many others in other places, which are all known by the manner. But what we have already said about him must suffice. He died at the age of 68, and he was buried in his own tomb in San Marco at Florence. His portrait, by the hand of Fra Giovanni, is in the sacristy of Santa Trinita, in the figure of an old man with a cap on his head, representing Nicodemus, who is taking Christ down from the cross. End of Michelozzo Michelozzi. End of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, Volume 2, by Giorgio Vasari, translated by Gaston de VERE.